Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs and another edition of Anniversary Albums. Today we're going to be looking at albums that are having a significant anniversary in the month of November 2024. For those of you who are new to this series, when I say a significant anniversary, I'm talking about one that ends in a 5 or a 0. So 50th, 35th, 20th, that sort of thing. You'll get the hang of it as we go along. As always, I've picked 10 albums. As usual, it was a big list to choose from, and I did have to leave out quite a few albums that I think you'll all let me know about in the comments, and you'll probably let me know about some I didn't even think of. So let's get into it with our first album, which is having its 50th anniversary in the month of November. It was originally released on the 1st of November 1974, and that is Autobahn by Kraftwerk. Now, this was their 4th album. It was their first album to really sort of make an impact on the charts, especially outside of Germany. It had the sidelong title track Autobahn, which is, you know, mostly synthesizers and vocals with, you know, the electronic percussion and all that sort of thing. But then side 2 is a little bit more like their earlier stuff, where they do use some acoustic instruments, flute and that sort of thing, but process it electronically to give it a different sort of a feel, give it a more experimental feel. And Autobahn, the title track, I think it was the first track they'd done with vocals, which obviously going forward they would do mostly vocal music. But side 2 you get Kometen Melody 1 and 2, Mitternacht, and Morgenspaziergang. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of those, but they're all instrumental. As I say, they use some instruments other than synthesizers and electronic percussion, and you know, there's a little bit of guitar on this as well as flute. And yeah, it's different, especially side 2, from what you'll probably be used to, that sort of, you know, godfathers of synthpop sort of thing that they would do on albums like The Man Machine and Computer World and that sort of thing. But this is the beginnings of that, you know, coming away from their sort of more avant-garde experimental side and coming into the electronica. And it's a wonderful, wonderful album, definitely worth listening to if you've never checked it out, or if you only know the sort of 3-4 minute version of Autobahn, go listen to the full 22.5 minute version that's on here. Absolutely wonderful stuff. Speaking of music that's a little experimental and out there, the next album we're going to have a look at is having its 55th anniversary in the month of November. It was originally released on the 7th of November 1969, and that is Umaga by Pink Floyd, or Umaga. I've never known which way to pronounce that. I've always said Umaga, but now obviously this is a double album. The first record is live versions of previously released Pink Floyd material, and wonderful, wonderful live versions they are too. You get an incendiary version of Astronomy Domini. You get probably the definitive version of Careful with That Axe, Eugene, that's on record anyway. You get an incredible version of Set the Controls for Heart of the Sun, and you get a great, great version of A Source Full of Secrets. Absolutely worth the price of admission just for that live disc. But disc 2, the studio disc, is the 4 members of Pink Floyd doing solo stuff. And most of it is very experimental. Richard writes Sisyphus parts 1 to 4. You know, mostly keyboard based, but he does use some guitar and some percussion and that sort of thing. It's instrumental. It's definitely sort of program music, to use a classical term. It's supposed to be sort of conjuring up the images of Sisyphus from Greek mythology, of rolling that stone up the hill only to have it roll back down again and having to do it over and over again for eternity. Roger Waters, you get 2 tracks. You get the lovely acoustic ballad Grantchester Meadows, which is just absolutely beautiful. Lovely singing from Roger too. But then you get several species of small furry animals gathered together in a cave and grooving with a pict, which is just absolutely wonderful. Tape manipulation and, you know, weird vocals to make all these animal noises. And then at the end, Roger Waters just ranting in this Scottish accent. Just, it's delightfully daffy. Just really weird stuff. Then you get David Gilmour's The Narrow Way, parts 1 to 3, which I think is a triumph for David. I love The Narrow Way. It starts off with this beautiful acoustic guitar piece, which I think they'd originally played for the BBC and called it Baby Blue Shuffle in D minor or something like that. Then you get this sort of psychedelic guitar piece for part 2. And then you get the actual song, The Narrow Way, for part 3. And I think it's wonderful. Only thing I would say is that the vocals are a little buried in the mix because I think David wasn't very confident with his lyrics. I think they're fine lyrics. They're not Roger Waters level lyrics, but I think they're perfectly all right. And then you get the absolute gargantuan tape manipulation experiment that is Nick Mason's The Grand Vizier's Garden Party. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. Part 1 and 3 are little flute pieces played by his wife at the time, Lindy. The bit in the middle is this percussion piece with just tons and tons of tape manipulation and all that sort of thing. Might be the weakest one of the 4, but I still think it's enjoyable for what it is. I've done a Pink Floyd studio albums ranked. I'll leave a link to that in the description. Please do check that out if you haven't already. I really like this album, as you can probably tell from the fact that I've raved on about it for as long as I have. The next album we're going to have a look at is having its 50th anniversary in the month of November. We've got quite a few 50th anniversaries this month. It was released on the 8th of November 1974. It is the 3rd album by this band, and that is Sheer Heart Attack by Queen. Now, I've also done a Queen studio albums ranked. I'll leave a link for that in the description. This ranked pretty high because it is one of Queen's best albums as far as I'm concerned. You have the absolute killer rock and roll of Brighton Rock. You have the wonderful piano-led piece Killer Queen, which was their first sort of international smash hit. They'd had a hit with Seven Seas of Rye at Home before, but Killer Queen was the one who broke them sort of worldwide. You got the wonderful Tenement Funster, Flick of the Wrist, Lily of the Valley, Now I'm Here. What a great song that is to close out side 1. Then you get In the Lap of the Gods, starting side 2, and you get In the Lap of the Gods Revisited, closing out side 2. So you get that sort of bookending thing going on. You have the incredible Stone Cold Crazy. Some people say that sort of invented thrash in 1974. I don't know. Metallica did a great version of it. You got Dear Friends, you got Misfire, which is the first song on a Queen album written by John Deacon. And it's a great little song. Of course, he would write a bunch of hits for Queen after this. You get the wonderful Bring Back That Leroy Brown, which has got that sort of vaudeville music hall kind of feel to it. I always love it when Queen does that. You got She Makes Me, Stormtrooper in stilettos, and then, as I say, In the Lap of the Gods Revisited closes it out. It's a wonderful, wonderful album. Do check out my Queen studio albums ranked if you haven't already. It's one of my more recent videos, so yeah, check it out. Next album we're going to have a look at is also having its 50th anniversary in the month of November. It was originally released on the 11th of November 1974. It is the second album that this band released in 1974, and that is Propaganda by Sparks. Now, I've done a Sparks studio albums ranked. We actually picked a top 10 because they've got like 28 albums depending on how you count them. I did that with the wonderful Larry Graves, also known as Canadian Stud Muffin. I'll leave a link to that in the description. Suffice to say, this album ranked very highly for both of us. It starts off with the little title track, Propaganda, which is just this little a cappella piece. Absolutely wonderful. Then you get what might be my favourite Sparks song of all time, At Home, At Work, At Play. I feel like if you want to know sort of early to mid 70s Sparks and you want to sort of sum them up in one song, At Home, At Work, At Play is the one to do it. Reinforcements is great. BC. Thanks But No Thanks. Don't Leave Me Alone With Her is wonderful. Never Turn Your Back on Mother Earth. It actually has a, you know, Sparks are always criticised sometimes, but they're always well known for, you know, lyrically often having their tongues firmly planted in their cheeks. But I feel like this is actually a quite sincere song about sort of ecology and that sort of thing. Something for the Girl with Everything is wonderful. Absolutely one of the most entertaining songs. At Chew is wonderful. It's kind of silly though. Who Don't Like Kids. Bon Voyage to close the album out. I mean, yeah. Absolutely brilliant, brilliant album. And definitely a great album to start with if you want to start with the Sparks catalogue. I know they've got so many albums, it's daunting to get into that. You know, this one or Kimono My House, which is the other album that they released in 1974. Both really, really good entry points into Sparks catalogue. The next album we're going to have a look at is also having its 50th anniversary in the month of November. It was originally released on the 18th of November 1974. And that is The Butterfly Ball and the Grasshopper's Feast by Roger Glover and Friends. And, I mean, some of the friends he has on here, you know. Tony Ashton, Ronnie James Dio, you know, Lisa Strike, Mickey Lee Sewell. And I'm just talking about some of the vocalists here. You know, there's so many great musicians on this album as well. Les Binks on drums, Ray Fenwick on guitar, Mo Foster on bass. You know, just, it's an all-star cast, but it's very much Roger Glover's baby. Concept album based on a children's book, but it's just absolutely wonderful. The song that most people will know off this, if they know anything, is Love Is All. Had a wonderful little film clip, animated film clip that went with it. We used to get that here in Australia. That used to get played on ABC TV all the time as like a little 3-4 minute time filler between programs, because the ABC is the government broadcaster. It doesn't have paid advertising. So sometimes they would use these little film clips and stuff as little buffers in between programs. And they used to play the Love Is All clip all the time. And I adored it as a child, and I still adore it to this day. But the whole album is wonderful. You know, Get Ready, Saffron Dormouse and Lizzie B, Harlequin Hare. You get all these characters that are from the book. Old Blind Mole, you know, Behind the Smile, Fly Away, Sir Maximus Mouse, Together Again. It ends with Homeward, which is wonderful. Yeah, I mean, absolutely wonderful album from beginning to end. I have been known to say that of all the Deep Purple related albums, and I will be the first one to admit I don't know everything in the Deep Purple family. I know a lot of it. But all the albums in the Deep Purple family, Butterfly Ball just might be my favourite of all of them. Love it to death. The next album we're going to have a look at is having its 40th anniversary in the month of November. It was originally released on the 19th of November 1984. It is also the second album this artist released in a year, because he released his debut in 1984. And then this is his follow-up album. I am, of course, talking about The Riddle by Nick Kershaw. Great album. I mean, his first album, Human Racing, is just absolutely wonderful too. But The Riddle is just a great follow-up, every bit as good as the debut as far as I'm concerned. Starts off with the wonderful Don Quixote. You get the great Know-How, You Might, Wild Horses. It's not the Rolling Stones song, it's his own song. It's a slower song, a ballad, much like the Rolling Stones' Wild Horses, but that's where the similarities end, in that they're both ballads. You get the wonderful Easy to close out side one, where you get a special guest bass guitar from Mark King from Level 42. And he plays just as you would expect Mark King to play, with that wonderful slap bass that he plays. You get the Riddle, the title track opening side 2, one of my favourite Nick Kershaw singles. Such a great song, such a complex song for a 3-minute sort of pop song. Surprisingly complex. You get City of Angels, Roses. Oh, I love Roses. Just one of those sort of quirky songs that Nick Kershaw would do that I really, really love. Wide Boy, another great single. And then you get the very sort of sincere and sonorous Save the Whale. It's a much quieter piece. It's a slow piece. But, you know, the message is about saving the whales, which, you know, in the 80s, we were really worried that, you know, a lot of the whales were going to go extinct. You know, a lot of the big ones like the blue whales and that, they're still endangered, but they're slowly building up their numbers again because of the sort of Save the Whales movement, you know, in the 70s and the 80s and what have you. It's a great album and a great place to start. Again, if you don't really know the Nick Kershaw catalogue, first 2 albums are really good places to start. But don't stop there. Keep going through the catalogue. His later stuff is wonderful too. The next album we're going to have a look at is another one having its 50th anniversary in the month of November. It was originally released on the 22nd of November 1974. It is the behemoth that is The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis. Now, friend of the channel, Martin Popov, from The Contrarians and many other places, has just recently put out 2 Genesis panel books where he gathered a bunch of people who talk about music and get their opinions on every Genesis album, from Genesis to Revelation, all the way through to Calling All Stations. It's split into 2 books. The first one goes from 1969 to 1976. The other one goes from 1978 to 1997. I was honoured to be asked to be a part of that panel. I talked about From Genesis to Revelation, the self-titled Genesis album, and Calling All Stations. I will leave a link in the description to those books at martinpopov.com. So please do check those out if you're a Genesis fan. I think they're wonderful. And I'm not just saying that because I'm in them. I'm probably the worst part of them. Anyway, Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Such an ambitious album. Double album, concept album. Not necessarily one of my absolute favourite Genesis albums. I love this album a lot, but it's definitely flawed. I've done a Genesis studio albums ranked. I will leave a link to that in the description. It's hard to talk about individual tracks on this album because it really does kind of play as one piece to a certain extent. But the title track is great. Fly on a Windshield, Cuckoo Cuckoo, In the Cage. I first knew In the Cage from the live version that's on 3 Sides Live, sung by Phil rather than Peter. And he does a great job of it live as well, and as does the whole band. But yeah, it's great, you know. Carpet Crawlers. What a great song. Absolutely wonderful. Anyway is one of my favourites on there. It's a really lovely sort of piano ballad. The Lamia is a great sort of epic song, as is Colony of Slipperman. Light Dies Down on Broadway. And then It, closes the album. As I say, I've left a number of tracks out because they're kind of, you know, connecting tracks and that sort of thing. It really does play as one whole piece, but it's a great album. It's not maybe a top 3 or top 5 Genesis album for me, because I like some of the Phil era stuff as much as I like some of the Peter stuff. I'm not a strictly one or the other guy, but it's a really good album. You know, Genesis probably only made 1 or 2 albums that I'm not so keen on. This is definitely not in that category. I love this album a lot. Next up, we're going to look at another double album. We've had a few double albums this month too. This is the second album by this artist. It was released on the 23rd of November 1979. It is a post-punk masterpiece. It is second edition by Public Image Limited, also known as Metal Box. I'll put up a picture of the original container because it was like a film canister, which had, instead of 2 LPs in it, it actually had 3 45 RPM EPs, all the same tracks though. And yeah, I don't own one of those because they're prohibitively expensive to get your hands on, especially in decent nick. They're very rare, but I'd love to get one of these days. But, you know, the tracks on here, this is unrelenting. It is experimental. It is on the edge of, you know, what was possible in 1979. This really is post-punk, because it takes punk and just goes so much further than that sort of 3-chord rave up. This gets really experimental. It gets really out there. It's not going to be for everybody. A lot of people are going to find this a difficult listen, and I get that. But I love this album to death. Things like Albatross and Swan Lake, Chant, The Suit, No Birds, Pop Tones. I mean, there's an ironic title if ever there was one. Memories. It's a really, really good album. There's some instrumentals on it too, like Radio 4 and Graveyard. Give it a listen. I will guarantee that there will be some people that just don't take this album. This was not a huge commercial success. And it's not commercial music. It is deeply uncommercial music, but I really like it. I think there's a lot to like here, if you're into that sort of weirdness and difference. The next album we're going to have a look at is the youngest album we're looking at this month. It's having its 35th anniversary in the month of November. It was originally released on the 27th of November 1989. It's an Australian band that I really haven't talked about on the channel, and I need to rectify that because I really love this band. The album is called Ghost Nation. The band is Hunters and Collectors. They started off as a more experimental band, very influenced by Krautrock and that sort of thing, sort of Can and Noi and that sort of thing. They then sort of morphed into more of a sort of Australian style pub rock band. This album is really anthemic. It might be the most anthemic album they ever put out. The songs here really have that sing-along feel to them. But this is a great rock album. They have a horn section, you know, which has a French horn in it, which is an unusual instrument for a rock band, or for a horn section, generally speaking. You have trumpet, trombone, and French horn. Wonderful stuff. I love French horn. I think it's an underrated instrument. But the first 2 tracks are well known here in Australia. They got played on the radio all the time. That's When the River Runs Dry and Blind Eye. But you've also got Love All Over Again, Crime of Passion, You Stole My Thunder. Side 1, killer. Side 2 is a little more, I don't want to say laid back, but it's not quite as in your face and anthemic. You know, the title track Ghost Nation is wonderful. The Way You Live is a lovely song. That got a fair bit of radio airplay too. Gut Feeling, Lazy Summer Day, and Running Water. Yeah, I mean, if you can imagine an Australian-style pub rock band with really anthemic choruses and a three-piece horn section including French horn, that's what you get with Hunters and Collectors. If you don't know them, check them out. Human Frailty, which is an album of theirs from 1985, I think, or 86. That's a great place to start with this band. This is not a bad place to start either. I really, really like this album. And then the last album we're going to have a look at this month is having its 55th anniversary in the month of November. It was originally released on the 28th of November 1969, and that is Let It Bleed by the Rolling Stones. I've done a studio albums ranked of the Rolling Stones in the 60s with the wonderful, wonderful Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation. I'll leave a link to that in the description. Please do check that out if you haven't already. I mean, this is really either the album before this, Beggar's Banquet, or this one is generally where most people consider the Rolling Stones' classic period to have started. This was the last album they would do for Decca Records, or London as it was in the US, before they would set up their own Rolling Stones records. But I mean, you know, you've got the title track, Let It Bleed, Love in Vain, Midnight Rambler. I mean, one of the all-time Rolling Stones classics, as is Give Me Shelter. I mean, wow. You Got the Silver is great. You Can't Always Get What You Want, another all-time Stones classic. I remember having the single that had that and Honky Tonk Women on it. I had that as a kid. I bought it at a garage sale or something, and I used to love that single. You got Live With Me, Monkey Man, and then you don't get Honky Tonk Women on this album, but you get Country Honk, which is kind of Honky Tonk Women, but done with this very sort of American country twang to it. It's an interesting way to do it. I love this album. It's one of their all-time greatest albums, without a doubt. I'm sure most of you already know this one. I don't need to tell you to check this one out, but it's a great, great album. So there you have it. Those are my 10 anniversary albums for the month of November 2024. As I say, please let me know in the comments which ones of these you like, maybe which ones you don't care for so much. And most importantly, let me know which albums you think I should have included, because I definitely had a much bigger list for November, and you guys often come up with albums that weren't even on my list, and I kick myself for not thinking of them, but I love it that you bring them up because I get to go and listen to those albums. Please do like, share and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted, so if you want to look at some of my other anniversary album shows, I have a playlist for that. If you want to have a look at some of my studio albums ranked shows, like the ones I've mentioned in this episode, I have a playlist for those. And if you want to see my appearances on other people's channels, like Canadian Stud Muffin or Rock Daydream Nation, I also have a playlist for those. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at bicyclelegs on Instagram, Twitter, and a bunch of other places. I also have a dedicated Bicyclelegs Facebook page. Links are all in the doobly-doo. Please do give those all a follow and join in the conversation. I'd really love to have you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.